The apartment next door had been vacant for 11 months when the smell started. Not a bad smell. That is the part that took me longest to process. Not the smell of something dead or rotting. Not the smell of damp or neglect or the particular staleness of a space that has been sealed too long. Something else. Something that I eventually identified after 3 days of trying as the smell of a space that is actively occupied by a person. The specific, faint, warm smell of human presence. Cooking, warmth, skin, breath, coming through the wall from an apartment that the building manager had confirmed twice was empty. My name is Daniel Osei. I am 41 years old, a secondary school mathematics teacher who has lived in the same flat on the 4th floor of a converted Victorian building in South London for 7 years. The flat on the other side of the shared wall is number 14. I have lived next to number 14 for 7 years. In those 7 years, I have had 3 neighbors: a retired nurse who moved in with her daughter after a fall, a postgraduate student who left when his course ended, and a young couple who separated and left separately, she first and he some months later. After the couple left, number 14 was empty. The estate agent put a card in the hallway. Several viewings happened. I heard footsteps, voices, the particular acoustics of an empty flat being shown. Nobody moved in. The months passed. The smell started in November. I noticed it first on a Wednesday evening, coming home from work, taking off my coat, and registering without quite identifying it that the flat smelled of something it hadn't smelled of before. Not my flat, the hallway outside both flats. A faint warmth to the air, a quality of recent occupation, like walking into a room where someone has just been. I registered it and attributed it to the building's shared heating system cycling on after the cold snap, which was a reasonable explanation and which I held for approximately 4 days before I stopped being able to hold it. Because the smell was specific to the wall. It was stronger at the wall I shared with number 14 than anywhere else in my flat. I noticed this on the Saturday, sitting at my desk by the east wall, marking exercise books, and becoming gradually aware that the air on that side of the room had a quality that the air on the other side did not. Warmer, slightly, more present, the smell of someone nearby. I knocked on the door of number 14 that evening. No answer. I pressed my ear to the door, which I am aware is not a normal thing to do, and heard nothing. No television, no movement, no sound of any kind. I put my hand to the door and felt the air at the gap beneath it. The air coming under the door was warmer than the hallway air. Not dramatically, slightly. In the specific way that air is slightly warmer when a flat is heated and occupied than when it is not. I went back to my own flat and sat on the sofa and looked at the shared wall for a long time. I called the building manager on Monday. His name is Pavel, competent, unhurried, the kind of person who solves building problems efficiently and without drama. I told him number 14 seemed to have an issue with its heating, running hot, possibly, given the warmth coming under the door. He said he'd check it. He called me back an hour later. I went and looked, he said. Heating is off. Has been off since the last tenant left. The flat is at ambient temperature, colder than the hallway, if anything, because it hasn't been heated in months. I asked if he had gone inside. He had. He described it as completely empty, exactly as left, no signs of any entry or disturbance. I thanked him and hung up and sat with the wall that was slightly warm on my side, the wall that smelled of someone being on the other side of it. I was a mathematics teacher. I was trained in the rigorous evaluation of evidence. The evidence was contradictory, and I held the contradiction carefully, and I waited. The sounds began in the second week of November. I want to be precise about the sounds because precision is what I have. They were not dramatic sounds. Not the sounds that feature in the kinds of stories people tell about supposedly haunted places. Not knocking, not voices, not footsteps that walk across a ceiling. These sounds were domestic. The specific small sounds of a person going about the business of being at home. A drawer opening and closing. The creak of a floorboard under weight. Specific weight, specific location. The creak that happens when a person of a certain mass stands at a particular point on a wooden floor. The soft click of a light switch. The sounds that you hear from an occupied flat through a shared wall and that you stop registering because they are the background of cohabitation, the ambient evidence of a neighbor's existence. I heard them from a flat that was empty. I documented them. I am a methodical person, marking, planning, assessment, and I applied these habits to the sounds. I kept a notebook by the shared wall. Date, time, sound, duration, intensity. I did this for a week. The pattern that emerged was consistent with the domestic routine of a person who worked from home. Activity in the morning between 7 and 9, quiet for most of the day. Activity again in the late afternoon and evening. Cooking sounds, or what sounded like cooking sounds, between 6 and 7 in the evening. Then quiet. Then, at some point between 11 and midnight, a final sequence of sounds that corresponded, if I was willing to hear it that way, to a person going to bed. I was willing to hear it that way. The data made no other sense. In the third week, I stopped sleeping well. Not dramatically. I did not stop sleeping. I slept 5.5 hours rather than my usual 7, and the sleep I got was lighter than usual, more interrupted as though some part of me was listening even when the rest of me was unconscious. I noticed, on the nights when I lay awake, that the sounds from next door followed no strict boundary between day and night. At 2 in the morning, I sometimes heard the floorboard creak. At 3, I sometimes heard the drawer. These sounds were no different from the daytime sounds. Same quality, same volume, same domestic, ordinary character. Except that whatever was making them was doing so at 2 and 3 in the morning, in an empty flat, in the dark. The smell had intensified slightly, or I had become more sensitive to it. I could no longer sit at my desk without being aware of it. That particular quality of the air on the east side of the room, the warmth, the presence that had no source I could locate or verify. I had pressed my palm to the shared wall on several occasions, and it was not warm to the touch. The warmth was in the air, not the surface. As though someone was breathing on the other side, and their breath was coming through. I told my colleague Amara about it in the 4th week, over lunch in the school staff room. Amara taught biology, had a methodical mind and a low tolerance for what she called magical thinking, was the person I would have predicted to respond most usefully to a precise recounting of what I had observed. I told her everything: the smell, the warmth, the sounds, my documentation. She listened without interrupting, which was unlike her, and when I finished she was quiet for a moment. "You've been living alone for how long?" she said. 3 years, I said. "Could be auditory pareidolia," she said. "The brain finding patterns in random building noise, interpreting them as human activity, because that's what it's primed to interpret." I had considered this. "The smell isn't pareidolia," I said. "The warmth isn't pareidolia." She looked at her food. "You should talk to the building manager again," she said. "You should get someone into that flat." Then she said, more quietly, "Or you should move." I asked her why. She looked at me steadily. "Because if it's not pareidolia, then something is in there. And something in there for this long." She paused. "Something that's been there for 11 months and has established a routine. That's not new. That's not a random occurrence. That's something that has decided to be there." I sat with that for the rest of the school day and for a long time after. I got into the flat. Not by myself. I asked Pavel to let me in for a maintenance check, which was a thin pretext, but which he accepted without comment, which suggested that on some level, he also wanted someone to look at the place properly. He opened the door with his master key. We went in together. The flat was cold. I noted this immediately, colder than the hallway. As he had said on the phone, the heating was off. There was no smell inside the flat that I could detect. No warmth, no presence, nothing that corresponded to what I experienced on my side of the wall. The flat was empty in every verifiable sense. No furniture, no possessions, no signs of occupation. I walked to the wall we shared. I put my hand on it. From this side, from inside number 14, the wall was cold. I stood with my palm on the cold wall and thought about the warmth I felt from the other side of it, from my desk, from my flat. I looked around the empty room. Bare floorboards, white walls, a single window overlooking the back garden. Radiator off, light through the window, gray November afternoon. Nothing, absolute nothing. And yet I was standing in a flat where, according to my 7 weeks of documentation, someone spent their mornings and their evenings and the hours before bed. Someone who had a routine. Someone who had established a domestic life in an empty flat and who was entirely invisible when observed directly. Pavel said, "Everything looks fine." I said, "Yes. Thank you." We left. I stood in the hallway after he locked up and looked at the door of number 14 for a long moment. Then I went back to my own flat. The wall was warm on my side. The smell was there. The flat next door was empty. I began to think about the specific quality of empty. Not philosophically, practically. What does it mean for a space to be empty? It means no registered occupant, no lease, no entry in the building's records, no key held by any named person. But the building is old, Victorian conversion. The bones of it are 140 years old. The walls have absorbed a very great deal of living. I was not given to this kind of thinking normally. I taught mathematics. I dealt in proof. But at some point in the 6th week, sitting at my desk in the evening with the smell around me and the sounds coming through the wall, a drawer, a floorboard, the ghost of a kettle being filled, I found myself thinking, what if empty is not the same as vacant? What if a space that has been lived in for a very long time, through many occupants, many routines, many mornings and evenings and hours before bed, what if such a space develops something that persists even when the people are gone? Not a ghost in any simple sense. Not the residue of one specific person. Something more like the accumulated habit of occupation. The trace of 100 domestic routines, compressed into a pattern that replays because that is what the space knows how to do. I wrote this in my notebook, next to the documentation of sounds. Then I read it back. Then I sat with it for a long time. It was not a rigorous hypothesis. It was not falsifiable in any standard scientific sense. But it was the closest thing I had to an explanation that fit the evidence, and I had run out of other explanations. In the 7th week, the sounds changed. Not dramatically, incrementally. The pattern was the same. The timing was the same. But there was a new element. A sound I had not recorded before and that I spent 3 days trying to identify precisely. It came in the evenings, after the sounds that corresponded to cooking, before the sounds that corresponded to going to bed. A soft, repeated sound, irregular, not mechanical. At first I thought it was a creak of expansion and contraction in old pipes. Then I thought it might be a floorboard settling. Then, on the 4th evening, I identified it. Someone reading. The specific sound of a person turning pages. I know this sound. I am a reader myself, and I teach in a school, and I have spent a great deal of my life in the company of people and paper. It was the sound of pages turning at the irregular rhythm of someone reading at their own pace for perhaps 40 minutes before stopping. I sat on my side of the wall with my notebook open and wrote the time and duration and could not write what it was for a long time. Then I wrote, pages turning. And then I sat for a very long time in the quiet of my own flat with that entry in my notebook and the smell around me and the silence from next door that was, I now understood, not silence at all, but the specific quiet of someone absorbed in a book. I moved into a hotel the following Saturday. Not permanently. I told myself not permanently. I needed distance from the wall. I needed several consecutive nights of sleep in a room I was certain contained only me. The hotel was functional and anonymous, and I slept for 8 hours the first night for the first time in 2 months. In the morning, I called Amara and told her what I had done. She was quiet for a moment. Good, she said. How long? I don't know, I said, until I can think clearly about it. She asked what there was to think clearly about. I told her about the pages turning. Another silence. Then she said, Daniel, that flat needs to be rented to someone. The moment an actual person moves in, whatever is in there, if anything is in there, will have to deal with a real occupant. Maybe that resets it. Maybe that's the solution. I had thought about this. What if it doesn't reset it? I said, what if whoever moves and just joins it? Amara said nothing for several seconds. Then, have you considered that you might be experiencing a mental health episode of some kind? I said, yes. I've considered it carefully. I don't believe that's what this is. I believe that what's in that flat is real and has been real for 7 weeks, and I documented it carefully, and I am telling you what I documented. A pause. What are you going to do? She asked. I don't know yet, I said, and I didn't. I stayed in the hotel for 9 days. On the 9th day, I checked out and went back to my flat. I made tea. I sat at my desk. I looked at the shared wall. The smell was there, faint, present, the warmth in the air on the east side of the room. The flat next door was still officially empty. I opened my notebook and looked at 8 weeks of documentation. Drawer, floorboard, light switch. Cooking, quiet, reading. The routine of a life lived on the other side of a wall by something that had no lease and no face and no key. I have lived here now for a further 2 months since the hotel. I have not moved. I have considered moving, specifically on 4 occasions, and each time I have concluded that I do not want to be the kind of person who moves away from a thing without understanding it. I teach mathematics. I believe in working the problem. The problem is that I do not have enough information to work it, and every method of obtaining more information requires me to be in closer proximity to the thing than I have been willing to go. I have not knocked on the door of number 14 again. I have not asked Pavel to let me in again. I have sat at my desk and documented and listened and continued my life on my side of the wall. The sounds continue. The smell continues. The readings, I think of them as readings now. Those 40-minute evenings with the turning pages continue. Whatever is in number 14 is not threatening. It is not aggressive, not intrusive, not interested in me beyond, perhaps, a faint awareness that something is listening from the other side. It has a routine. It has had a routine for months. It was there before I started listening. It will be there after I stop. I am not sure I will stop. The notebook is nearly full. I have started a second. I do not know what I am building toward. A conclusion, an understanding, simply the record of something that happened and that I did not pretend away. I am still here. It is still there. We are neighbors. The wall between us is thin, and every evening, at a little after 9, I hear the pages turn. I am not frightened of it. I want to be clear about that. Not because I am being deliberately calm, but because the thing next door has given me no reason for fear. It has its routine. I have mine. We exist on opposite sides of a wall that is perhaps 30 centimeters of Victorian brick and plaster, and we have coexisted for 2 months since I returned from the hotel. And in that time, nothing has changed except that I have become more accustomed to the smell and more attuned to the rhythm of the sounds and less inclined to explain them away. The second notebook is filling. I do not know what I will do when it fills. I think I will start a third. I think I will keep listening until I understand something I do not yet understand, or until it stops, or until I find that it will not stop, and I must decide what that means for how long I intend to stay. For now, I stay. I listen. The pages turn. I have started, in the last week, doing something that I recognize as irrational and that I cannot stop doing. I say good night. Not aloud, silently, at the wall, before I turn off my own light. I do not know if it registers anything. I do not know if there is anything to register. But the sounds of settling and happen on the other side, as they always do at that hour, and I turn off my light, and there is a quality to the silence that follows that feels, if not mutual, then at least parallel. Two people on opposite sides of a wall, both in the dark, both at the end of a day. This is what I have, in place of understanding. It is not nothing. Some nights, it is almost enough. There is a specific comfort in having a problem you cannot solve but can describe. Mathematics taught me that not every equation resolves. Some sit open, permanent, productive in their irresolution. The thing in number 14 is an open equation. I have 7 weeks of data, 2 notebooks, and a growing facility with the sounds of a domestic life conducted in an empty flat. I do not have an explanation. I have, instead, something I value as much: the precise, faithful record of what I observed, and the decision to keep observing, and the 9 o'clock evenings when I sit close to the wall and hear the pages turn and know, without being able to prove it, that on the other side something is doing what it has always done, in the only way it knows, in the space that it has made, in some sense, its own. The documentation is what keeps it real and what keeps me sane about its reality. Those two things existing in tension, which is fine. I can hold tension. 7 weeks of a sound notebook and 2 months of a silence notebook, and I am still here, still listening, still noting the time and the quality and the duration. If someone reads this after me, if someone moves into flat 15 and wonders about the wall and the smell and the domestic sounds from a vacant flat, I want them to know it is not dangerous. It is not malicious. It has a routine and a rhythm and 40 minutes of reading at 9 in the evening, and it has been there far longer than either of us. Be precise. Keep notes. Say goodnight if you need to.